Tonight, millions of Nigerians are paying a private company for electricity that never actually arrives. At the very same time, their own tax money is quietly funding public bailouts to keep that same company standing. Many families are paying for the same failed power supply twice, once on a monthly bill and once through the government propping up the company behind it. And after 13 years, almost nobody can tell you who actually owns that company. It's July 2026, and this is Historic Capital. We're opening the case file on 11 companies, trillions of naira in public money, and a promise the government made in 2013 that has never been kept. Thank you for being here. You are exactly why this investigation exists.
Power is never given. It is taken, hidden, and controlled. This is Historic Capital.
On the 1st of November 2013, inside a government hall in Abuja, President Goodluck Jonathan himself handed signed certificates to a room full of new owners. 11 electricity distribution companies, the wires, meters, and poles reaching into almost every Nigerian home, changed hands that single day. Officials called it the end of a broken state monopoly. What nobody explained, then or since, was exactly who was standing in that room to receive the keys. For decades, one government company had run Nigeria's power grid into the ground. It was called PHCN, and before that, NEPA, a name Nigerians joked stood for Never Expect Power Always. So when the Bureau of Public Enterprises announced it would sell the grid to private hands, the promise was simple: real owners, real capital, real electricity. There was even a scoring system behind the sale. Bidders weren't judged on cash alone. They were scored on how much they promised to cut technical and commercial losses, the electricity that gets lost, stolen, or simply never billed. Winners made specific promises on paper about performance they would deliver. Keep that promise in mind. We will come back to it. 11 distribution companies changed hands for $1.26 billion combined. Add the generating plants sold that same week, and the total came to roughly $2.5 billion for control of an entire national power system. But the buying itself was thinner than it looked. Under the sale rules, winners had only 15 business days to post just 25% of their bid price. 25% down on companies meant to rebuild a national grid. Nigerians were told this was the fix that would finally work. Within 12 months, the grid had already collapsed 24 separate times. 24 total nationwide blackouts in the very first year of private ownership. That number should have ended careers. Instead, it quietly became the baseline everyone learned to live with. A grid that delivers barely 1,000 megawatts to a city of 25 million people. Shanghai, with roughly the same population, delivers 30 times that at peak demand. So who exactly approved these winners? The Bureau of Public Enterprises ran the bidding. The National Council on Privatization signed off on every single name. Both bodies still exist today. Neither has ever had to publicly explain why so many of the winners could not raise real capital of their own. And the question that actually mattered was never whether the lights would come back on. It was who these new owners really were, and what, if anything, they actually owed the public in return. Start pulling the paperwork, and the first thing you notice is how little it tells you. Abuja's distribution company went to something called CAN Utility, a joint venture between two firms almost nobody in Abuja had ever heard of: CEC Africa Investments and Xerxes Global Investment. Benin's went to VJO Power, a consortium that didn't finance its purchase with cash on hand. It borrowed the money instead, through debt raised with a commercial bank. Two of Nigeria's 11 electricity monopolies in the very first weeks already financed more by leverage than by their own capital. That pattern repeats across the map. Eko went to a company called West Power and Gas. Ibadan and Yola both went to the same little-known group, Integrated Energy Distribution and Marketing. Enugu went to Interstate Electrics. Kano went to Sahelian Power. Port Harcourt went to a consortium simply calling itself 4 Power. The rules made this easier than it should have been. A single core investor was allowed to win up to 2 distribution companies and 1 generating plant at once. Multiply ownership like that, and the same interests start reappearing across completely different parts of the same supply chain. In Lagos, that's exactly what happened. The consortium that won Ikeja's distribution license was closely tied to the same interest that already owned Egbin, the power plant generating electricity for a huge share of that same city. The buyer of the wires and the buyer of the power flowing through them were, in effect, sitting on both sides of the same transaction. There's a saying you hear in Nigerian markets: the one who owns the well decides who drinks from it. In 2013, ownership of Nigeria's electricity well passed to a small circle of consortiums. Several financed more by borrowed money than by their own capital. But if several of these buyers borrowed the money just to purchase the companies in the first place, who was really financing Nigeria's electricity all along? Here is the mechanism nobody put on a campaign poster. The same year these companies took over, the Central Bank of Nigeria opened a special lending window just for the power sector, the Nigeria Electricity Market Stabilization Facility. In 2014, the central bank signed a formal agreement with the ministries overseeing power and petroleum and with the industry regulator to open that facility for business. Then it opened another facility, and another. By 2023, spread across 6 differently named schemes, the central bank had pumped more than 2.3 trillion naira into the same 11 companies it had just finished selling off. The World Bank joined in too, approving a power sector recovery program worth $1.52 billion, a fresh credit line backed by the Nigerian government meant to keep the same distribution companies solvent. So, the citizen was paying twice, exactly as this investigation opened with. Once through a monthly electricity tariff, again through the taxes that fund the central bank support and the government loan guarantees propping up the very companies charging that tariff. This is not a subsidy that rewards good performance. It is a backstop that activates regardless of performance. Remember that promise from Chapter 1 about cutting technical and commercial losses. By the mid-2020s, actual losses were running at 33% against a regulatory target of 21%. A company can miss its own promise by a third and still draw down public loans built specifically to keep it standing. The system does not really punish failure to deliver electricity, it finances it. And once you see that, a much bigger question opens up. What actually happens when one of these companies fails completely? We already have an answer because it already happened. In early 2022, the company that had owned Ibadan's electricity distribution since 2013 defaulted on its loans. Control did not pass to angry customers or to prosecutors.
I think we sold about 2 or 3 properties, high value properties. And I gave you, one of them that the reserve price was set at 6.4 billion, but was sold for 12 billion. Another one, the reserve price was 1.9 billion. We sold it for 3.5 billion. And then we have another one now that we are in the process of selling. The reserve price is about 9 billion, and we already have an offer for 11 billion. So we're moving.
It passed to AMCON, the same federal bad debt agency originally built to absorb Nigeria's banking crisis over a decade earlier. AMCON quietly absorbed this failure too and kept the company running. One state-backed cleanup agency now recycled across 2 different sectors of the same economy. Back in 2013, Kaduna's own bidders were expected to pay just over $160 million within 6 months of taking over. A decade later, the same company owed the market hundreds of millions more, not in purchase price, but in unpaid debt for electricity it had already been given. Up north, Kaduna's distribution company owed the electricity market more than 93 billion naira. In May 2023, the regulator gave it 60 days to pay up or lose its license outright. That 60-day countdown came and went years ago. The company is still operating today, still carrying the debt. And buried in the regulator's own notice is a detail almost nobody noticed. One of the investors named on that debt is the Bureau of Public Enterprises itself, the very agency that ran the original sale. The seller is still, quietly, an owner. Meanwhile, ownership keeps changing hands anyway. In January 2025, Eko's distribution company was sold again, 60% of it, to a brand new consortium for more than $200 million. A second sale. A second set of unfamiliar names. This is not the first time Nigeria has run this exact experiment. In 2001, the state telecom company Nitel was sold to a buyer that couldn't raise the money. The next buyer, a management firm called Pentascope, spent barely 2 years turning a 15 billion naira profit into a 19 billion naira loss. A later buyer had its sale revoked too. Nitel wasn't actually resolved until the mid-2000s. 13 years, a string of failed buyers, and nobody personally held to account for any of it. Same government agency running the sale. Same pattern of buyers without real capital behind them. Nigeria's own Senate Committee on Power would later call the entire electricity privatization fraudulent and exploitative, in an official report, not a headline. And the numbers back the anger. The national grid has collapsed at least 162 times since that first handover in 2013. By early this year, the unpaid debt owed to the companies that actually generate the electricity had reached 6.8 trillion naira. Nigeria's own bulk electricity trader has never once paid those generators in full. Not in a single month, in 13 years. In one distribution zone alone, for every 100 naira of electricity that reached the company last year, 71 naira simply vanished, lost, stolen, or never billed at all. Independent estimates put the annual cost of Nigeria's blackouts to the wider economy at around $1 billion every single year. Who rescued these companies when they failed? The same public institutions that funded them in the first place. Who, in the end, actually paid for every rescue? And in the very same week this investigation was being filed, the fight over what's left of that money was still playing out, live, in real time. Before the verdict, here is the chain, start to finish, exactly as the documents show it. A government sale. A consortium wins the license. The central bank creates a lending facility. The company draws down public funding anyway. The company defaults regardless. The government quietly rescues it. And the citizen, who already paid once on an electricity bill, pays again through the taxes that fund the rescue. Follow that chain far enough, and the honest question isn't just who owns each company anymore. It's who, in Abuja and in Washington, keeps deciding to fund the same failure again and again, and who ultimately pays for that decision every single time. In May of this year, the World Bank did something it rarely does. It cancelled $717 million of its own undisbursed loan to Nigeria's power sector, money it had already approved, because the government could not meet the reform targets attached to it. That is the lender itself admitting on paper that its own rescue plan did not work. And yet, months before that cancellation, the same institutions had already opened a brand new door for exactly the same money. In February 2026, the government and the World Bank launched a fresh $500 million program for the same distribution companies, aimed at closing the metering gap. 3.2 million new meters, promised over 4 years. Around 700,000 had been delivered by the time this investigation was filed. Barely 200,000 were actually installed. Cancel 700 million with one hand. Open 500 million with the other. The pattern from Chapter 1 never actually stopped. It just changed which document it lives in. The number that finally broke the old program was the tariff shortfall, the gap between what Nigerians are charged and what the system says it actually costs to deliver that power. In 2022, that gap stood at 140 billion naira. By 2024 and 2025, it had exploded to nearly 1.9 trillion naira, almost 14 times larger in 2 years, while the loans kept flowing the other way. And right now, this month, July 2026, Nigeria's own regulator has ordered every distribution company to lock away between 70 and 85% of what's left of their revenue into dedicated accounts earmarked strictly for infrastructure spending. The regulator says its own review found some companies sitting on cash instead of reinvesting it. The companies say the order will scare off the very investors the sector still needs. 13 years after the handover in that Abuja hall, the argument in the room has never actually changed. It is still about who gets to keep the money. Somewhere tonight, the shop owner this investigation opened with is still counting fuel money for her generator, completely unaware that any of this is happening, in boardrooms she has never heard of and will never see the inside of. Verdict: Nigerians did not lose reliable electricity because a privatization failed. They lost it because failure itself quietly became part of the business model, one that pays out publicly no matter which way the lights go. The 11 companies from 2013 are 12 now. Some have already changed hands again, quietly, to buyers just as unfamiliar as the first ones were. Trillions of naira in public money later, one question still has no answer. If nobody has ever had to say who truly owns Nigeria's darkness, what makes anyone think the next trillion will be any different? If you've ever sat in the dark counting how many times the light has flickered this month, you already know, in your body, what this investigation just proved on paper. Following the money is the only way anyone ever finds out who really owns the dark. If this case file mattered to you, the next one is already open. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The truth is in the transactions. Follow the money. You are watching Historic Capital.